Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now here in my hands, this is my Ruger PC Carbine, but it's in a million pieces. Well, if you've been following my channel in one of my prior videos, I took this all apart, went through a complete cleaning, kinda said, well, I'm not gonna completely put it back together because I have a project. Well, today it is time for that project, and that's exactly why I have this in pieces. Because what we are going to do, well, we're going to put a skin on this with gun wraps. This here is a rifle skin. This is basically what they're calling tactical universal wrap kit. This is in Ghost ATAX, which is really, really cool. So I'm going to skin out my rifle. Now, the first thing I can tell you is this is a very tedious process. I have done this before with one of the competitors' products on my Ruger 1022. So it does come out very, very good when you take your time and just have a little bit of patience and kind of just settle into the project and plan and get everything in order. And well, that's exactly what I hope is going to happen with my Ruger PC Carbine. And so today what we're going to do, we're going to go through it in detail. I'm going to get everything set up. I'm going to get everything prepared. I'm going to settle in. We're going to get into this, but with that said, I have a whole bunch to do and a whole bunch to share with you. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what I'm about to get into, do me a favor, stay tuned. Now, before we get too far, I would like to say thank you very much to the people at Gun Wraps who did provide this for review. Now, one thing I think you're going to find is if you get into this, right off the bat, one of the hardest things for me was just picking which color I wanted to go with. That's the first thing. When you go to gunwraps.com, they have so many choices. It's crazy. It literally blows the competition out of the water. So if there's something you're looking for, there's a pretty good chance they're gonna have it. Now, there were a few patterns that I was curious about. I couldn't quite find them, but they have a ton of licensed camo patterns, a ton of different colors, different designs. Really, really cool. And beyond that, they have a ton of different kits. So depending on your firearm, depending on your rifle, depending on what you're trying to achieve, they have so many different kits. Now, the next thing I'm going to say is the people at Gun Wraps are extremely attentive to the details. They very much pay attention to the details. They are on top of communication. They have a lot of great advice. And when you look at how much vinyl comes on this kit, it's a crazy amount, and more than I believe I am going to need by a long shot. This here has all the different parts. So from the foregrips and handguard assemblies to the buttstock, so you can see the buttstock pieces, through what they're calling patch strips, and then they end up with your magazine sections right and left, and then optional receiver area if you want to cover your receiver. Just so much here, including on this a pick rail section, so like fully cut out to fit your standard 1913 pick rail. This is just so cool, and I struggled so hard to find what pattern I wanted. Now, my objective was to break up my rifle into a couple of different sections where I would have camo in basically these two main areas. So camo covering, my actual main stock, and then my handguard. But I'm going to have the black barrel passing through. I'm going to have the black receiver on top. I don't think I'm going to cover the pick rail, but depending on how things go, maybe I will. But I think that's what my objective is. So to kind of break this up and get it into a little bit of a compound detail, which does mean I should have more than enough wrap here, but I definitely need to pay attention and lay everything out carefully. Now, the next thing I'm going to say about gunwraps.com, they are literally a one-stop shop. So I have a bunch of stuff here that I've bought as part of the kit. Now, these are accessories, but I wanted all of the accessories to appropriately handle the job. So you'll see here as I break out all of the different gear, this is all available from Gun Wraps OUTERLIMITLESS.com, and it gives you the ability to really get started and do everything you need. So from X-Acto blades and the knife itself and extra blades and gloves to protect your hands if you need it, and the squeegees that you need to get everything nice and smooth and into place, to whatever this primer, I'm not exactly sure what this is, but I'll figure it out. This is what they call the primer. And then I've also opted to add this gel. Now this gel goes on the grip section, and it's a two-part system which adds texture to the grip when you're done. So after I do this entire wrap, I go back after and I use this two-part system to actually add a little bit of grip texture to the handle area, which is so cool. That was one of the things I found on my prior projects, that the vinyl can be very slick, so having a little bit of grip will go a long way. And so at this point, I'm getting a little bit nervous because I know that this is the make or break moment. So with that, let's get into this. A long, tedious project, I can tell you. This is going to be a few hours, so get ready. Just kidding, I'm going to wrap all this up as quickly as I can for all of you, but I am going to give you all of the steps as we go through this so you can see how I approach it. .75 for the overall circumference here. And when I look at the actual piece of vinyl here, do I have 6.75? Well, no. That there is just shy of 4 inches. So I need to leverage both of these pieces. So critical bits of information you need to gather even before you get started. Now lining this up on the back edge, getting my ruler here, I am going to leave myself, I think, just a little bit of space. Actually, this is the side that butts up against the receiver, so theoretically, if this went flush all the way to the edge, it would be a nice clean fit like that. And then coming up to this edge, do I want to leave it slightly shy or wrap slightly over the front? I mean, if I can get it nice and clean and tight against this edge, I'd say I prefer to do so. So I'm going to make marks like this. And that's going to carry straight up on both sides because I need to use both of these to completely wrap this. Now, of course, I'm working off a big, huge sheet here. Tons of stuff going on. And it's really easy to kind of get lost. So what I'm going to do, got a nice sharp pair of scissors here. I'm actually going to cut each one of these critical pieces apart. Now you'll notice that they are labeled. So here it calls patch strips. Here it says buttstock left, buttstock right. I'm going to be careful. There's, plenty of white area in between. These are beautifully laid out. That's a bonus. I mean, just so nicely laid out that there's plenty of room to work here. It's easy. So as you kind of get your project started, I mean, just get organized, take a minute. I suggest, the easiest thing to do right now before it gets difficult is just cut all of this apart and make it so that it's manageable pieces so that you're not, getting in the way or trashing other parts of your kit. So taking a minute now will go a long way in the end. So you can see with everything cut apart, I mean, I'm just setting all my other pieces aside for now. Plenty of extra material. Now the main pieces I'm going to be leveraging here are the foregrip. So you can see the left and right foregrip for the handguard assembly. And then here, this is the buttstock, so left and right. So I'm going to start with the handguard. Now, again, I'm cutting this kind of tight, which goes a little bit against what I'm usually into. I typically like to leave a little bit of extra space, but the reason why I'm doing that is two things. One, this seems to be fairly even and symmetrical. It's not like this like tapers in any direction. So if I'm careful and I get this established nice and straight, it should go on very even. And two, I am actually not looking forward to cutting with X-Acto blades or like razor knives up against the metal. So you'll see I have a technique I'm going to use that I think is going to be very effective for this. But with that, I don't necessarily need too much in the way of extra. So this is one of those make or break moments. So again, you know, measure twice, cut once. I'm going just again to sort of stack this up. That looks good to me. And here on the line, bam. So this is good to go. I'm gonna make my cut and I can wrap the foregrip. You can certainly use a number of different types of markers. This happens to be a permanent marker. If you wanted to, you could probably get away with something that would be easier to wash off. You know, it just depends on your goals and objectives and what you're trying to do. I think having the ability to wash it off is definitely good, because if you go a little bit like wide of your marks will then wash off later, or if you make a mistake. But what I can tell you is this vinyl is coated, and in the past when I've done these before, the permanent marker has even had the ability to wash off. So I'm not terribly concerned, but too late now. And of course, this becomes extra, and this is what I have to work with for my handguard. Now, you've seen me already fully degrease everything. Still a couple little, it looks like it's pretty well dry, so I think I'm good, and it's time to wrap this thing. So I do need to think a little bit about the seams. Now, I can tell you that I think I'd prefer to have the seams at the very top and very bottom, if possible, rather than in the more like grip areas on the sides. I don't know if it's gonna matter, but we're gonna find out one way or another. So as I get this down, now this will require heat at some point soon, but not quite yet. So again, I'm trying to aim for the dead center, and it's easy to see through the rail and line up the center of the rail, giving myself just a tiny bit of relief. And this is the part where if I can establish this perfectly, it's going to go really well. And I'm really taking my time to get this down and centered. And that will do it. And you can see on the end, you're probably not going to see because of the angle of the camera, but I have a little bit extra on the end, which is fine because that's going to wrap around the front. And the back end, I have perfectly flush, minus about a 1/16 of an inch to buy me some space. Now, this is the gamble that I'm like, how is this going to go? Can I literally like roll this thing and get it to go nice and smooth and perfect? This would just be so awesome if this works. Which, yeah, man. I mean, that to me is one heck of a start. So I'm happy about that. And I'm literally going to do the exact same thing a second time. Although, my instinct tells me, deal with one piece at a time. So I'm going to work this fully into place and then do the other piece after. So we're starting here. And so what that means is now I need to start firmly pressing everything into place. Now I'm going to work pretty much from like the middle out in all directions. So, you know, so if there's any wrinkles or anything like that, I can take advantage of having a little bit of room to move, but this is pretty much, once I start to set this in firmly, I'm not going to say it's permanent, but I'm pretty well stuck in my ways at this point. Now, if you want, you can use the squeegee. It's got this like, you know, soft side. You can use this to work it into place. I find that I do like to use, you know, my fingers and my thumb and kind of feel it. Look for those spaces. Now, remember, I took photos for a reason. That's because I am going to have to put little cuts in various locations to take account for the spaces in the, you know, in the rail, and then also the M-lock, and then bolt holes and things like that. So having some photos to refer to at this point becomes critical, and you'll see areas like this. So this is where I'm going to start to make up, you know, some of the excess. Like, for example, now I need to start getting into the X-Acto knife and putting in some cuts. Getting a little bit of pressure and stretching this down. Now again, heat is also going to be your friend in many cases. So I'm not stretching too far, just getting things started so that it's very well established before I apply the heat gun. You can see here, that's an M-lock slot, M-lock slot, M-lock slot, M-lock slot. Even a little bit of heat and friction from your fingers, starting to get things moving in the right direction. Trying to find the middle of the M-lock. I'm not touching the metal. I'm just simply making a slit from one end to the other, right down the middle, as close as I can. And that vinyl is going to wrap down the inside of that M-lock and get it coated and covered so that it actually has a real clean look. That's going to be nice. And the other good part about this is you're not cutting up against the metal on your guard. So you shouldn't be causing any damage. Now, you can leverage some different tools. Like, for example, I'm just using this punch real quick to kind of get everything seated down and into the corners. Just working to my favor in the right directions. It's nice and round. It's not going to cause any damage to anything as long as I'm careful. And I'm just going to keep repeating this process for a while. It's going to take a little bit. You're not going to miss much. Just going to be doing the same thing. I'll be back shortly. And so you'll see as I'm working my way through this, it's coming out very, very clean. It is taking a while, but it is well worth it for the result. So again, I'm getting close. Now what I'm doing is I kind of have been figuring out a little bit of a technique. I'm still on my first blade, but I can tell you I'm probably about due to change, and I might do my very final little touch up with a fresh blade. But basically what I'm doing is, as I had originally said, I'm kind of pressing down In the areas where I'm going to be working this, getting a little bit of a slit here. Now at this point, I'm able to work right on the edge of the guard on the inside of the hole and just cut out kind of rough, being very careful not to dig into the actual guard itself. And then I'm like getting the vinyl kind of like rough cut as close as I can to the edge, but leaving a little bit of a space. And then that's kind of pulling out a piece at a time. Now, beyond that, and I'll do this in a second, I have a second pass in each one of these holes, or maybe even a third pass to kind of clean up the edges. So you'll see here at this point, as I work out my main sort of chunk here, at this point, that comes out. Now, to clean this up, it's a little bit of a technique, but I'm riding the blade close to the edge and barely touching it. I'm barely kissing the edge and canting the blade slightly to the side so that it's getting a nice clean edge, yet at the same time not really cutting with the blade itself into the metal. So you'll see here as I kind of ride the blade, it's going to take me a couple passes, but each time I do this, it gets kind of cleaner and cleaner on that edge. And then my final pass, it comes out really, really nice. So you'll see, just taking my time, slicing motion. That's the key. Don't rip the vinyl. Use a real easy slicing motion, and you get a real clean cut on this vinyl without it pushing, pulling, tugging. I'm working my way into the corner, just barely riding the edge. I'm not digging into the metal. Just riding that blade so gentle, but it's slicing right through the vinyl with a super clean cut. And at this point, you'll see as I come to the end here, real quick, pulling that off. Boom. And you'll see the edge super crisp. And in the areas where it's not perfect, I just go back and touch it up. So that's my technique, and it's working extremely well. So now at this point, this is basically the first half. This is literally a couple hours of work. I mean, not continuous. I've had a few other things to do, but I mean, all in, I've been at it for a couple hours. Now, this is the top of the rail. I'm now going to match the next piece that's going to come down and kind of wrap around, but I do think I want it to end at the bottom. So I have to figure out the length and maybe cut a piece a little bit short. It's hard to say. I think I would prefer that. So if we kind of take a look at this here, if I'm starting with this, in theory, right on this line, because I'm going to get a tiny bit of overlap, in essence, this will go here. Let's try that again. On the line. Yep. Just like this. This is going to go from here to here to here to here. That's going to be my mark. So if I mark this in the middle, right here, that is the amount I need to cut off. So that's going to be my next move. Okay. And like the rest of this, save these little pieces. They can definitely come into play. And so now here we go. So kind of got to be careful. Need to line this up really as perfect as I can. So this is going to be one of those really careful, take my time type of things. Now, I got the factory edge and the cut edge, and I want my factory edge to be the perfect edge. So that means that needs to go like this. And I'm going basically as close to the middle as I can, with maybe just a touch of overlap. So it will have a little bit of a lip, but I'm okay with that. I think that's about as good as I can do. And now, if everything goes according to plan, perfect. That landed right on the bottom in the middle. And that's about perfectly on the top in the middle. So I nailed this. That is awesome. Getting that top perfectly into place. Oh, I'm pumped. That went as well as I possibly could have asked. That's awesome. So far execution is perfect on this rifle. I am definitely pumped. And now, this handguard, absolutely perfect. I am pumped at how good this came out. It's literally, I mean, there's maybe a couple tiny little pieces of leftover stuff, but I mean, the coverage on this and the way it looks is about as perfect a job as I could do. Now, at this point, I do have to add some heat. So, hot air gun or just a real nice warm hair dryer. I am going to use, I would say, a hot air gun on low, but I'm not going to kill it because I don't want to accidentally create bubbles underneath this. It is literally so smooth and so perfect that it would really bum me out if this got damaged from the heat. So you do often want to use heat to activate the glue, that's, the adhesive, I should say, because that will, get a little bit gummy and really take to the steel. But all in all, I mean, just how clean the edges are, how well it went, and ironically, I'm literally still on my very first blade. So again, that just shows if you're careful, not digging into the metal, not damaging the edge, that will last. So this entire thing here, even though it was a couple hours of work, one single blade. So very, very nice. I am very happy with this. Like, extremely happy. This is awesome. Which now at this point, getting the hot air gun and just gonna get it up to temperature, not going crazy hot, just enough to kind of warm things up, get this nice and stuck and formed. There's a couple areas like along the logo here that'll help that stick nice and tight through here. This is where, if you want, you can get away with the squeegee, but I think for me, again, just going to go easy. Just kind of rub everything down and into place. So I'm going to work over this over the next few minutes, and we'll be able to move on. And so now this is where things get interesting. And the reason why I say that, you get a lot of sort of weird and wonky shapes that you need to work with and stretch the vinyl and get it to move and snake around these sneaky areas. And that's a recipe for not the results you're looking for. So you really do at this point need to take your time and plan things out. Now, for me, my goal is going to be to try to use a factory edge right on the top seam and make that about as mint and clean as I possibly can. And then from there, work my way down, getting everything as good as I can, just straight, and pulling the vinyl like this way. And at some point, I'm going to probably try to get it to come over the bottom of the stock and then cut off the excess. And then I'm going to try to do the same thing, and I'll end up with a little overlap down in this area, which is fine. That's going to be tough, but that is how I'm going to approach it. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to bite it all off at once. So if I line this up and go to the back end of the buttstock, okay, so these are my critical areas. At this point, I think I'm better off just squaring up and then having a couple of nicely placed and strategic seams versus things getting all weird and wonky and overlapped. So in my opinion, the better way to approach this is take care of this area first, which is difficult. Then get your nice clean pieces of vinyl over all of that coming from both directions, and I think the results will be a little bit better. But that does mean I'm going to have to make a couple of cuts here. So my thought process is this. This is the most square and even section I have. So I'm going to address this part separate, which means I'm going to make a little mark right here. And actually, it's going to be the mirror image on the other side. So I'm going to translate that line all the way up through this piece. And I'm going to have a right hand and a left hand side. So that's my goal to start. Now with that marked, I am going to cut these pieces. Keep in mind, this is the buttstock right and buttstock left dedicated pieces, which this is good because it has nice, clean, square factory edges and leaves a good, healthy chunk still available. And then the next pieces that I'm going to think about and be prepared for, again, keeping in mind, I'm going to use these nice pieces to cover up my sloppiness a little bit. So these got set aside here. But the next pieces, I'm going to leverage what they're calling the left foregrip handguard assembly. So these pieces I'm going to leverage along here, which again, that's more than enough material to do a nice job and cover all of this. And then if I need to patch some stuff in, I can, but I don't think I'm going to need to. And this is the leftover again from that handguard. I think that's going to wrap under here just fine. So the fact that I was careful in the first place and left myself with all this material is paying dividends right now. So I'm going to save these, which means at this point, I am leveraging the leftovers from the buttstock to do this whole middle section. So the way this is going to lay out is like this. This is going on first. This is going to handle the middle. And then I have my handguard pieces, which are going to go like this and have a little bit of overlap. Then I have my buttstock pieces, which are going on like this and also have a little bit of overlap. So as long as I'm careful, that should cover everything nicely, wrap around, trim off, and have a nice even pattern consistent from beginning to end. So my objectives are being met. Now, just for the sake of this, I'm actually leveraging a black Sharpie, and I am putting a couple of simple little dots on my actual stock. You might not be into that. I know this will come off with a little rubbing alcohol if I needed to, or degreaser, or something like that. But that is my guide and my target for this particular piece of the vinyl. As long as I land this in between those dots, I know these other pieces will cover. So with that, let's get into this. And the other part about this is if you don't approach it right, the pattern can go wonky. So in other words, if I start here on a straight line down the seam, by the time I get to here, the pattern goes crooked. So I want to be very careful to keep the pattern as straight as possible so that when all these pieces line up, the pattern is continuous and doesn't change angles. So that's another little tricky thing worth keeping in mind. Which, based on a somewhat rough alignment, means if I match up the vinyl right here and right here, those are the sort of registration marks I made on my stock itself. So that'll wrap over the top. There's enough for this to wrap under the bottom. It keeps everything square. I don't know. This is where you say, go for it and hope for the best. So, I don't know. No reason to delay at this point. It's just kind of wing it and go for it. And the other thing I'm going to say is this is when you really do rely on heat to kind of bend the vinyl around and make it work. So at this point, I am very exposed in my project here. And if there's going to be a part of it that looks kind of messed up, this is going to be it. So that is on the registration marks. Now, I'm not going to press anything down terribly firm. And I'm just kind of finding my way onto the stock and starting from the middle and just sort of working this around. So going easy, just kind of finding my way, wrapping the edges, finding the contours. And you can also sort of pick this stuff up and put it down a little bit as long as you're careful. It does have a little bit of leeway, but this is where the heat is going to start to matter. So I need to find all these crevices and just take my time. And then you also might need to make some funny angled cuts in strategic locations. But I'm going to feel this out for a minute and see how it goes. These are the areas through here where, now that it's starting to bind, a little bit of heat's going to go a long way. Maybe a couple of strategic cuts. This will end up with some pretty hard wrinkles if you're not careful. Now, thinking this through, I feel like this is an area for a potential cut because this vinyl will wrap over and this will come over the top. So I'm going to make a slice, probably about like right here. Which feels like that's about the right spot. So I'm going to finish that cut up. In fact, I'm going to get a fresh blade now that I'm working on the stock and go from there. So there we go. Nice clean slice. And this needs to carry just down a little further to about there, which should allow this now to more appropriately wrap. This might require some heat, but this piece here, that can go nice and smooth and clean over the top. This becomes extra, which I'll probably cut off, but that I'm happy with. So that's a good thing. And sometimes you might need to work more than one area at a time. So I'm actually going to start working the bottom of this too at the same time because this becomes a critical location. Now I can already feel like a little bit of a slice right here might also be beneficial. So I'm going to take my knife and just carefully run it like that, which means this piece can go down nice and smooth. So you'll start to see, you kind of got to make some of these little like tricky decisions and feel out the vinyl and like see how it works. It's its own medium. That's the confusing thing to understand. It's like a medium, and all artists need to learn to work with their medium, and this is no different than art. You can see, if you're not careful, you'll develop wrinkles in sort of bad locations. I don't want that. Now, I feel like another slice here will go a long way. So I'm going to just get in here and penetrate through the vinyl. Carry that slice out, which allows me to take this and now at this point smooth out this area that otherwise had the wrinkles. And I try to work the wrinkles right out of it. This is where I need to start applying a little bit of heat. You can see this gets nice and soft and pliable. But again, just so tricky. Now, keep in mind, while you work on this, there will be funny things where you're just going to bump into problems, but you just kind of got to go with it. So like here, you can see I had no choice. In order for this to even move, I kind of had to slice that. I really didn't have a choice. The pattern was going to go wonky. It was going to stretch all weird and get all wrinkled. And I opted to just try to get it as smooth as I could going back down. And, you know, I can still work all of these wrinkles. These little wrinkles here can, for the most part, all come out of here as long as I press this down into the pattern on the grip. But if that was a big, huge crease, that would have been a nightmare. So what I need to do is just kind of continue to go with this. And in the end, pick some strategic places to patch and overlay and hopefully cut some pieces that fit down nice and flush. But I'll address all that at the end. Got started on the buttstock, and that actually went very well. So pretty much what I'm doing is I'm using the buttstock piece here. As I had mentioned the whole time, my plan was to line it up on the top, taking my time, working it very easy down the sides, and then just making some simple considerations as it gets down towards the bottom. My final cut, I'm going to do my best to go along this line. Now, I did find that, you know, sometimes you got to break out the scissors to kind of get a straighter cut. It does end up quite jagged, leveraging the X-Acto knife. And the other thing that I'm not thrilled about, but it just is what it is I end up with a hard break right here. There's not much I can do about that. Now, it is what it is. What I think I might do, and I know it sounds a little funny, but if I can pull it off, I might actually use a couple of trim pieces just to kind of intentionally break this up so it looks intentional. Instead of it being a seam like this, it'll actually be an intentional band to break things up. But we'll see what happens when everything sort of shakes out in the end. Working my way through the receiver area, this is particularly challenging. Weird angles. I had this to what I thought was about perfect. Now it developed a bubble, which sometimes, I hate to say it, but sometimes you do need to kind of pop them, and that ends up being just a nasty little wrinkle, but it comes with the territory, and that smoothed out actually fairly well, all things considered. So every now and then, you know, little bubble, just like this, tiny little pop, and that just settled right into the corner. So, I mean, the heat definitely helps to, like, wrap it tight and, you know, smush everything into these crevices. But at the same time, it heats the air, which expands, and the expanding air leaves like little balloons here and there. So the good comes with the bad, and it is what it is. And this is one of those things where, like, some areas, like on the back end of this stock, I'm like, it's so good. That came out great. And then other areas, like up here, don't look too close. On the average, though, so far, this is coming out actually pretty sweet. So, more to come on this side. Which for this section, I'm using the foregrip handguard assembly sheets. And I don't know, it's going all right. I'm doing fine. Little overlap in some areas and trying to use the factory edges. I have one cut edge, of course, but using those to my advantage here, making sure this goes like high enough as you take a look here so that it like covers all the edges and then wraps around just a little bit and then goes all the way out past the front. And then kind of tipping this over once I get it to that point. And at this point, you know, I can start to smooth everything out and just work it down and easy up over the edges. And then down in this area starts to get all wonky around the mag well and whatnot. And so as you see here, anything that's flat, I am taking advantage of. And that's what's the part that's quite frankly going to come out the best. And everything else, it just comes with the caveat of the best I can do. Given my, you know, skill level at this, I'm certainly not a pro, and, you know, I'm doing my best to kind of make this all work, but this is not easy. People that can do a real good job at this, I can tell you they must have messed up a lot, because this is not the most easy thing to do, and it takes a heck of a lot of practice and patience and time. Now at this point, this came out, all things considered, pretty darn good. I mean, you need to kind of concede to the fact that there will be patches. It's kind of hard to get around it. There's overlaps. It is literally not perfect, but man, does it look good. And you'll notice on some of these seams, I actually put the, you know, sort of vertical tape pieces just to intentionally break it up. Now the next step for me, what I'm going to do is leverage this Tacti grip. So the gun wraps Tacti grip, which this does have installation instructions, but basically in essence we have a clear coat liquid and then sort of like a grip glass. So what you do is you get the liquid exactly where you want it. Now I am going to literally fill this entire area between these sort of tape areas, so the whole entire grip area, this whole thing is going to be the Tacti grip, and then you kind of sprinkle on the glass. So this should be pretty straightforward. I'm going to mask these areas real carefully just so that I don't get the grip kind of where I don't want it, and then I'll be ready to go. So with a clean microfiber, just going to get some basically alcohol, just wiping off this area before I go any further, just because my hand has oils and I want everything to just stick nicely here. So they do instruct you to kind of clean this up and get it all prepped. So with that, this should be in pretty good shape. All right, so I'm just going to spray the foam brush over the trash. Coating the foam brush, and I think I'm just going to do like one side of this at a time, just so that this comes out good. Otherwise the sprinkles will kind of fall off here. So that's the adhesive. Again, just spreading this out, making sure it's even. Underside here. All right. And now for the bead, which this has like a little shaker top here. Actually gonna do this a couple times. So that's one. Now as I'm looking at this, the underside literally is not touching because everything is just supported by the rest of the stock. So I can work on both sides at the same time, and that's key because each coat has about 45 minutes of drying time. So let's take advantage of this while we're at it. Now there will be some areas that I specifically miss. I mean, I can see already that I'm not going to capture all of this in at this angle, but this should be pretty good. And I'll get as much as I can. Shaker. Now the nice thing about working over the paper like this is I can gather up the extra and hopefully transfer it back into the shaker. So trying not to waste it, but all right. Coating number one. Now at this point, I am getting back into reassembly. Grip complete. This thing's really starting to take shape. I mean, definitely different, but man, is it cool. This grip is extremely, extremely aggressive, which take it or leave it. You know, I was sent this to test it and try it and review it and figure it out, and I certainly over-crusted this, but the reason being, I wanted to feel the grip, but I also wanted to kind of mask some of my, you know, chunky seams, which that did wonderfully. But the other thing is, you know, I really wanted to get that texture. So now as you take a look, it really breaks this up and adds a completely different texture in the middle of the stock, which is cool. But I'm working through reassembly now, and things that you need to consider. Like on the inside of the receiver area here, you can see that I do have overlap with my vinyl, and that could impede my ability to get the receiver in there. So those are things that you definitely need to pay attention to. Now at the time, I did that intentionally just to keep tension on everything while I, you know, work this out. But at this point, some of that probably needs to be cut out of there, because if not, that's an area where everything will rub, and tolerances are usually tight enough that that will become an impediment. So I've already done the cleanup to the magwell area. As you take a look at the inside, I mean, I cut everything out of there that was an impediment, and at least at this point, I mean, you know, my magwell adapter fits nice and inside with ease. So that is something to pay attention to, just making sure that you don't have anything that's going to get in the way of your reassembly, or the function for that matter. Now, something to point out while I'm reassembling this, you do need to kind of think about, you know, where you're going to put this grip. So you'll notice that the grip ends up kind of where my bolt hole is. Now, you're not going to hear it because I've kind of worked it out, but there was a little bit of that grit inside the threads. Even, you know, I knew that going into it, and I did my absolute best to clean that out of there. So you just need to be careful, because you can get a little bit of grit inside your threads. But at this point, everything going back together nicely, and this project's coming close to a close. Like, for example, if you listen here, I mean, you can hear just that bit of grit inside. Not a big deal, but something worth paying attention to. And so now, after a huge amount of work, a huge amount of effort, this is back together and looks absolutely fantastic. I am pumped at how this came out. A few deficiencies, not perfect, Don't look too close, but all in all, the effect is absolutely fantastic. So some tips and tricks in this video. I hope you learned a lot. I certainly did. Every time I do this, I learn a whole heck of a lot. If I could do this again, what would I do different? Well, I think what I would do different is actually trace the shape of my receiver with, a Sharpie or something like that onto the vinyl and cut it closer to shape in the first place. That's one thing. The other thing, and only time will tell, I know I went super heavy with this grip, but it looks cool and it feels good. It's just wicked grippy. And overall, this thing is just awesome. So I am pumped. And so to the people at gunwraps.com, thank you so much for providing this for review. And for the rest of you, if you like this content, do me a favor. Take a look at my Outer Limitless channel, which is more on my primary gear. On that channel, I cover everything from hiking, camping, and backpacking excursions, all the gear that goes with it. So from sleep systems, shelter systems, knives, axes, backpacks, flashlights, you name it. That's my Outer Limitless YouTube channel. So all right, guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.